This video is all about frequency adverbs. What is the difference between a frequency adverb and an exact time expression? What is the correct position of a frequency adverb within a sentence? This second question is a problem for most English learners. Luckily, I have a really neat trick to remember how to place frequency adverbs correctly within a sentence. But before we talk about that neat trick, let's talk about what a frequency adverb is. Most of us are already familiar with the exact time expressions and their position within a sentence. It's pretty easy. They are normally placed at the final part of a sentence. Here are some examples of exact time expressions. Yesterday, tomorrow, at 5 o'clock. Here are some examples of the correct position. At the end of the sentence, she went shopping yesterday. The exact time expression is normally at the end of a sentence. We will cancel tomorrow. You can place the exact time expression in the front of a sentence if it is the most important part of the idea. At 5 o'clock, we have an appointment. Frequency words are different. Frequency words tell us about percentages of time. For example, always is 100% of the time. Never is 0% of the time. Maybe we could say that sometimes is 50% of the time. The position of these words is much less flexible than exact time expressions. Here is a really neat trick to know exactly where you should place a frequency adverb. In my videos about making questions and negatives, I divide the verbs into two columns. Column A has the verb to be in all of its forms, is, are, am, was, were. Modals, words like would, could, should, may, might, etc. And then the verb to have, when it is used as an auxiliary verb. And then there's column B, which is every other verb. This division is very useful for frequency words as well. If you have a column A situation, you place the frequency word after the column A word. If you have a column B situation, you place the frequency word before the column B word. A is for after, B is for before. And just like making questions and negatives, only the first word in the verb is important. Sometimes verbs can be many words, but when thinking about where to place a frequency word, only the first word of the verb matters. Here are some examples. John is tired. What is the verb in that sentence? Is. Is the verb is in column A or column B? It's in column A. Where should we put the frequency word never? Because it's in column A, we should place it after the column A word. John is never tired. Let's try another example. Mary watches TV. What is the verb in that sentence? Watch. Is watch in column A or column B? It's in column B. Where should we put the frequency word never? Because it's in column B, we should place it before the verb. Mary never watches TV. Let's do one more example before we practice using several frequency words. John will visit clients. What is the verb in that sentence? Will visit. This time we have two words, but just as when you make a question or a negative, we only have to consider the first word of the verb, which is will. Is will in column A or column B? It's in column A. So if we want to add the word never to the sentence, we have to put it after the column A word. John will never visit clients. Now that we've established the rules, let's do a fluency exercise where we practice putting the frequency words in the correct position. If you are not familiar with this column A, column B arrangement, you may wish to review my asking questions and making negative answers video. There is a link to this tutorial in the description. There's also an entire transcript of this exercise in the description, but don't read along while trying to do this fluency exercise. If you want to improve your listening comprehension, pronunciation, and fluency, then you need to make an attempt to do this exercise without reading. This is a listening and speaking exercise only. You can review the written material either before or after the exercise. Let's begin. I'm going to say a sentence in regular spoken English, and I want you to repeat after me. Are you ready? Let's go. Mark and John eat lunch at 2. 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 Okay, now let's add the frequency word normally. By the way, what percentage would you assign to the word normally? Maybe 90%? Okay, let's put the word normally into the sentence. Mark and John eat lunch at 2. What is the verb? The verb is eat. Is that in column A or column B? It's in column B, so we have to put the frequency word before. Mark and John normally eat lunch at 2. Mark and John normally eat lunch at 2. Let's substitute Mark and John. Is that a he, she, it, you, they? They normally eat lunch at 2. They normally eat lunch at 2. How would you ask a basic yes-no question with that sentence? They normally eat lunch at 2. Do they normally eat lunch at 2? Do they normally eat lunch at 2? How would you answer no? No, they don't normally eat lunch at 2. No, they don't normally eat lunch at 2. Let's make a how often question. How often? How often? How often do they eat lunch at 2? How often do they eat lunch at 2? Let's say sometimes. What percentage would you say is sometimes? Maybe 50%? They sometimes eat lunch at 2. They sometimes eat lunch at 2. All right, super duper job. Let's do another one. Mary will search the database. Mary will search the database. Mary will search the database. Let's add the frequency word frequently. And by the way, what percentage would you assign to the word frequently? Maybe 80%? Mary will search the database. Mary will frequently search the database. A for after, B for before. Will is in column A. Mary will frequently search the database. Let's substitute Mary. What is Mary? He, she, it, you, they. She. She will frequently search the database. She'll frequently search the database. How would you ask a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Will she? Will she frequently search the database? Will she frequently search the database? How would you answer no? No, she won't. No, she won't frequently search the database. Can you make a how often question? How often? How often will she search the database? How often will she search the database? Let's answer with hardly ever. Hardly ever. What percentage would you assign to that expression, hardly ever? It's around 5%, maybe. She will hardly ever search the database. She'll hardly ever search the database. She'll hardly ever search the database. All right, awesome job. Let's do another one. Mike and I walked in the park. Mike and I walked in the park. Mike and I walked in the park. Mike and I, Mike and I, Mike and I, Mike and I walked in the park. Walked in, walked in. Mike and I walked in the park. Let's add the frequency phrase almost always. And what percentage of time do you think almost always is? Maybe around 95%. Mike and I walked in the park. Almost always. Mike and I almost always walked in the park. Walked is in column B, so we have to put the frequency word before. Mike and I almost always walked in the park. How would you substitute Mark and I? We almost always walked in the park. We almost always walked in the park. How would you ask a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Did we almost always walk in the park? Did we almost always walk in the park? How would you answer no? No, we didn't almost always walk in the park. No, we didn't almost always walk in the park. Okay, let's make a how often question. How often? How often did we walk in the park? How often did we walk in the park? All right, let's answer almost never. Almost never. What percentage of time do you think almost never is? Maybe 5%? We almost never walked in the park. We almost never walked in the park. All right, this is easy as pie. Let's do another one. Here we go. Mary and Lisa have visited that restaurant. Mary and Lisa have visited that restaurant. Let's add the frequency word often. 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 What percentage would you assign to the word often? Maybe 75%? 75%? We have Mary and Lisa have visited that restaurant. Let's add the word often. Mary and Lisa have often visited that restaurant. Mary and Lisa have often visited that restaurant. Let's substitute Lisa and Mary. What is that? He, she, it, you, they. They have often visited that restaurant. They've often visited that restaurant. They've often visited. They've often visited that restaurant. How would you ask a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Have they often visited that restaurant? Have they? Have they often visited that restaurant? How would you answer no? No, they haven't often visited that restaurant. No, they haven't often visited that restaurant. Okay, let's ask a how often question. How often? How often have they visited that restaurant? How often have they visited that restaurant? Let's answer rarely. Rarely. What percentage would you assign to the word rarely? Again, I think that's around 5% of the time. They have rarely visited that restaurant. They've rarely visited that restaurant. They've rarely visited that restaurant. All right, this is a cinch. Let's do one more. John worked in that office building. John worked in that office building. John worked in that office building. John worked in that. John worked in that. John worked in that office building. Let's add the frequency word normally. And what percentage do you think normally is? Maybe 90%? 90% of the time? John normally worked in that office building. John normally worked in that office building. Let's substitute John. What is John? He, she, it, you, they. He. He normally worked in that office building. He normally worked in that office building. How would you make a yes/no question with that sentence? Did he normally work in that office building? Did he normally work in that office building? Did he normally work in that office building? Let's say no. Let's answer no. No, he didn't normally work in that office building. No, he didn't normally work in that office building. Okay, let's make a how often question. How often did he? How often did he? How often did he? How often did he work in that office building? How often did he work in that office building? Let's add the word seldom. Have you seen that word before? Have you heard that word before? Seldom. That's about 5% of the time. Seldom. He seldom worked in that office building. He seldom worked in that office building. All right, fantastic job. I knew you could do it. Don't forget to take a look at my How to Make Questions video. The link is in the description. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you can get the next fluency exercise as soon as I publish it. And while you're at it, click that like button. It lets me know that you would like to see more exercises just like this one. Do you know someone who might benefit from this exercise? Share this video with your friends. They will thank you for it later, and so will I. Well, it's been so much fun practicing English with you today, and I can't wait to see you here again soon. But until then, goodbye.